The following episode discusses suicide and mental illness, including sensitive details regarding a death in custody. Listener discretion is advised. Support is available at 988. If you read the court transcripts, Noor looks like a threat, a 19-year-old facing stalking charges and a 3-year sentence for threatening a judge. If you look at the jail logs from 2 days later, she looks like a behavioral problem, stripped of her cellmate and moved into a dark isolation cell for making a rude remark to a deputy. But a psychological autopsy forces us to look at a much larger, more uncomfortable truth. It exposes just how undercooked our public institutions really are when it comes to handling severe mental illness. We build courts and jails to process external actions, but some of them are fundamentally ill-equipped to understand internal realities. They run on rigid black and white rules, leaving them completely blind to the messy, high-stakes complexity of a psychiatric crisis. Before Noor ever stepped into a courtroom, her mind was already a crowded, terrifying place. The system completely misread her reality. And when the heavy steel doors of that isolation cell clicked shut, they locked a drowning 19-year-old in the dark. Welcome back to Anatomy of an End, a podcast where we retrace the final days of those lost to suicide through the lens of forensic psychological autopsy. Our goal is not to cast aspersions or assign blame, but rather, we want to understand. Understand the warning signs, the missed opportunities, the myths and stigmas surrounding the topic of suicide in our society, so that together we can all become a greater force for prevention. Hey everybody, and welcome back. Today, forensic psychological consultant D. Edward Tatum and I are pulling back the layers on another case. We're examining the precise intersection where severe mental illness, intense cultural pressure, and the rigid mechanics of a system running entirely out of its depth collided. This is the case of Noor. Now, before we talk about Noor, Dana, you've been bridging this kind of gaping chasm between our systems and meaningful mental health treatment for the last 25 years?
Easily, yes.
So let's, like we always do, let's start with the person. Let's start with Noor. Can you tell us a little bit about her and where does this story really begin?
Noor was not unlike many young people. She was, as you said, 19 years old and has found herself in a great deal of trouble, most of which, clinically speaking, was a manifestation of her illness, an illness that her parents, like many parents, were unable to really comprehend, and due to cultural issues within their family. When I say cultural issues, I mean what one would consider cultural norms for persons of their background. Originally, both parents were born in East Asia, in a community, a small community in an East Asian country. We don't need to identify exactly which country because it's not a nationality issue we're talking about. We're talking about a cultural norm. But in their cultural background, their cultural schema, mental illness was something that in many ways doesn't exist. It's considered something like, I think even many Americans believe. It's so stigmatized there as here that many people believe it's a choice. It's something you just should shake off, snap out of it, quit acting that way. And in their culture, you can multiply that attitude times 100.
Mm-hmm.
So here you have a young person suffering from severe mental illness at an early age and not given help, not given the medical care she needed because culturally speaking and familial culture, just in their home, this was something that was not going to happen.
How would her family have reacted to her if she had come forth to them and said, I think something's wrong. I think I need some help, that kind of help?
Well, it would have been a reaction of, well, let's go see a doctor, and they would look for a physical issue. And when the doctor would come back and say, well, this is a mental issue, then it would be dismissed, discounted as something that she could control, something that she needs to change. This is rebellion. You need to stop acting this way. You're being ridiculous. And then as that progresses and the illness gone untreated becomes more severe, she would be treated as possibly an embarrassment, somebody that, we need to just keep her separate from what we would call the in group of the family and others, and hopefully she'll grow out of it.
So in her culture, a diagnosis or an assessment that resulted in a doctor saying like, oh, this is a mental issue, that would be perceived as just a defect of self-determination.
That's correct. It would be seen as something that she decided, and possibly even something that's due to Western influence in this particular family, having completed the psychological autopsy, obviously, on this tragic case. There is a strong possibility that, the father may have seen this as a result of moving to the West.
We're gonna end up seeing how this case unfolds, and we're gonna go through the facts of your psychological autopsy. But just to ask a little bit more about Noor as a person, what did her friends and family think about her? What was said about her personality that maybe the public record completely missed?
Well, think about teenagers. Noor wanted to be accepted. She wanted to have friends. She wanted to be a part of what she considered her peer groups, high school girls and boys. She wanted to be a part of that world. She was unable to on a couple of ways, a couple of barriers rather, that kept her from being a part of things. One, her dynamics of her family, not allowing her to, assimilate completely, being the first generation born here. There were some reservations about how American teenagers act and what they do and how they move about, and the social norms that we consider, and norm's a tough word when it comes to our society. There's a lot of norms, but in general, very generally speaking, she wanted to be like any other high school teenager in America, and that was a barrier in and of itself. Now, add to that the onset of severe mental illness at an early age.
Sure. And what did that look like for her? Do you have any indication that as to when maybe she noticed there was something where she was deviating from those around her? Maybe there was something that needed to be addressed, or that she didn't quite feel like she fit in? Was there anything like that happened?
Yes, examining records as part of the process of the psychological autopsy, I found that she had severe diagnoses, first beginning with troubles in school. The school psychologist found that there was a mood disorder and a possible dissociation at times from reality, which were barriers to her learning ability. This was seen, her bad grades were seen as a disgrace by the family and a lack of effort. And so that starts the ball rolling. Now, later, as much as I could sift from very scant medical records, that she received a diagnosis at what would be considered a very early age of schizoaffective disorder. Now, that is a very serious diagnosis. And along
can you just explain real quick
Sure.
what the difference between schizoaffective disorder and schizophrenia would be?
Certainly. For a person in the old DSM, especially, to be diagnosed as schizoaffective would require that, one, that patient meets all the criteria diagnostically to be diagnosed as a schizophrenic, okay?
Okay.
But also, they would have to independently, outside of the schizophrenic diagnosis, meet all the criteria to be diagnosed with a mood disorder. So it's a double whammy. You have a mood disorder that in and of itself is severe. Then you have schizophrenia. Now, what would that mean? What would that look like? Imagine a schizophrenic, a person who may have psychotic episodes where they're not oriented to time, person, place, situation. They may have paranoia. They may have auditory or visual hallucinations, tactile hallucinations, olfactory hallucinations, gustatory or taste hallucinations. They have all these different things that could possibly be going on, as well as a combination of them. But maybe they cycle out of it sometimes, like many schizophrenics can, and they may have periods of lucidity. Well, with schizoaffective disorder, it's a big chance that even during those periods of lucidity, being oriented, what's waiting for them is a severe mood disorder, like depression. Now, she also later, after her initial arrest, received a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD.
But was she diagnosed with some things before she was institutionalized?
Yes, the schizoaffective diagnosis came before she was went into the criminal justice system, and it was ignored largely by the family as something that just didn't make sense to them. And these are intelligent people, so let's not mistake cultural differences with intellect. These are very intelligent people, but their cultural bias was so strong in this regard that really no real help came to Noor. So
outside of that culture, some people would probably recognize that sort of reaction as foreign to them or abstract because, we're lucky, especially, in America, we take mental health pretty seriously in comparison to other
we're
countries.
Learning to.
Sure.
But it's kind of like we take it seriously when we're affected by it, but as observers of it, not personally affected by it, we still present quite a bit of ignorance.
What did her diagnosis look like on a Tuesday morning?
If you're unmedicated and you have the diagnostic criteria met for schizophrenia, a Tuesday morning or a Thursday night or any other time, you could be hallucinating. You could be reacting to internal stimulus. You may not be completely oriented times 4, which just means time, person, place, or situation. You may have hallucinations that are somewhat benign, or you may have hallucinations that are quite frightening. This could create paranoia. Reacting to the paranoia could involve invoking, parts of the limbic system and even fight or flight if the paranoia and the sense of danger is great enough, like any other human being. As you say, a Tuesday morning, maybe there are no symptoms of psychosis, but maybe there's the mood disorder. Maybe Tuesday morning there is an intense depression going on that makes a person just unwilling to get out of the bed, maybe presenting anhedonia, which is an inability to find pleasure or feel pleasure, even in things that one once enjoyed.
It seems to me, I'm sure you'll agree, that depression is one of the most heavily misunderstood diagnoses in our society, in our culture.
It is the worst named mental illness ever to me.
Yeah. No, I'm depressed. I think you said that, that was a word that maybe a kid would use to describe his baseball game being rained out,
A writer, his last name is Solomon, and I really apologize. I cannot remember his first name, but he's much more eloquent than I. He described it as the poverty of the English language, that a word that describes the feelings of a 7-year-old whose Little League baseball game got rained out, also is a word that we use to describe a devastating, even at times deadly, debilitating mental illness that can shut down someone's life. And this is an illustration of the poverty of our language. Depression used to be called other things too.
Melancholia.
Melancholia. And we used to laugh about how serious that sounded. Melancholy was a very passive word, but if you look at it nowadays and you say, well, I think they have melancholia. You might think, well, wow, I got to get to the doctor. I need some type of treatment for that melancholia. Do I need an ointment? Do I need an injection? I mean, that sounds serious. Unfortunately, we say depression, and the first thing that people react with are questions like, well, what do you have to be depressed about? Or you got a great life, or
as if it's,
look at your car, or
yeah,
you have this brand new job, or you make this much money.
Like it's all external. It's all external.
They don't understand. Depression is not sadness. Sadness can be an element of depression, but so can anger, irritability, anxiety, procrastination. These are all elements of anxiety. Frustration. It's not just a sad person. We asked that question, I think, on a previous episode. We're like, what does a suicidal person look like? And the imagery, due to the pitiful words we use to describe this terrible illness, or the imagery that comes forth is typically a person crying and sad and depleted. And that may be the case, but also could be a very angry person. It could be a very scared person. It could be a paranoid person. It could be a person unable to fulfill any of their dreams or aspirations.
Sure, because there's so many factors that go into it. And first of all, depression doesn't exist as just like you're either not depressed or you're depressed. There's a spectrum, right? You can be different, very
certainly. There's a continuum. It can be episodic. Think about, and I use this a lot when I'm teaching this stuff. I always challenge people. I say, "Has anyone in here in the classroom had mental illness?" And of course, most people just look down at the ground. They don't want to answer that question. If I say, "Anybody in here ever had strep throat?" the hands go up. Anybody in here have diabetes? Hands go up. Eyes forward, right? Anybody in here had mental illness? People look down at the desk. They look down at the floor. And I challenge them. I say, "Well, I'm going to challenge all of you on this." And I'll say to them, "Has anybody in here ever lost someone very close to them, someone they loved?" Hands go up. I'll say to them, "On that very day or the days after that terrible news, can you say that you felt the same, your appetites were the same, your energy was the same, your sleep patterns were the same, even your vision was the same, your perception was the same on that terrible day as it is today sitting here with me?" And of course they say no. Mm-hmm. And I'll say, "Well, you were mentally ill, albeit an episodic illness, albeit an illness that hopefully was temporary. Your brain was reacting neurochemically and emotionally to this terrible news. So you had a reason for this so-called illness at that time. So therefore you don't call it an illness. You call it mourning, or you call it grief. You call it sadness. Now imagine those same elements, those inability to sleep or sleep too much, eating, everything affected about you physiologically and emotionally, and it doesn't go away, and you don't climb out of it in time. For some people, that it takes a catalyst. For others, there is no real etiology that shows, well, your depression started on this day because of this. It just comes upon people. So this is debilitating. This is hard to understand. And when you go to someone and say, "I'm depressed," especially a young person, and a lot of times, especially men, because there's a stigma involved that depression equals what? Weakness. In Noor's family, to say one's depressed was a ridiculous notion. Who are you to be depressed? We have things to do. We have work to do. You have a job to do. You
have a roof over your head.
You have a roof over your head.
You've got parents that care about your well-being.
Exactly.
You don't have anything to be depressed about.
So stop being depressed. That's like telling someone with pneumonia, "Stop coughing." That's ridiculous. Just stop it.
And of course, the person suffering with depression, especially a younger person like that, the way they're going to internalize that is like, they're right. I am a problem. I need to figure this out, which just makes it worse, right?
Yes, it makes it worse. Think about this. And many adolescents go through this. They go through periods where no one understands me, is their feeling. As though they were the first person to ever be an adolescent in the world. That's part of being an adolescent, that you're self-centered. The world revolves around you and no one understands you, that you're extremely special in the sense that your issues, problems, and such could not be understood by a parent or a teacher. Only other people like you could understand them. Well, she had no peer group.
So she didn't have a whole lot of friends that she was close to?
Not at all, because she was isolated in her home for most of the time.
Come straight home after school,
exactly.
Do your homework.
And in time, they removed her from the school.
So was she being homeschooled at that point? Or
no, the best I can tell from the information I received is that she tested out through, one of these programs where you can go to school online. These certified programs that the public schools offer now. That was her family felt that was safer, better, and would keep her away from the wrong kind of people and the wrong kind of influences, which obviously are the reasons that she feels this way, because she's around these wrong people.
And we're gonna kind of take a closer look at how that didn't work out.
Did not work out.
And it's I don't want to place too much blame on the parents, because they're also facing pressure from their own culture. They had parents too. This is just what they know.
Yes.
And so ultimately she's dealing with these mental health struggles on a daily basis. They're probably getting worse. She's guilty now. She has remorse and regret and guilt for feeling this way, because she feels like something's wrong with her for not being able to overcome it. How does this condition lend itself to her trajectory?
Well, these type of feelings that there's no doubt in my mind that she was manifesting and were exacerbated by, one, her illness, but also her isolation. Isolation only exacerbates mental illness. Isolation cannot make a mental illness better. You add to the fact that her age, being adolescent, and that was quite a young age for that diagnosis. Most of the time that diagnosis is held back till, people are just a little older. They try to rule out other things. She had this diagnosis, which for some people, a diagnosis is like, the word stigma comes from what? Stigmat, which is a stain or a brand.
They ascribe
right?
a diagnosis as a facet of their own identity.
Exactly. And you have a person who thinks, no one understands me. I'm isolated. And another world begins within her, a world that she creates. Unfortunately, due to her illness, a world that she creates not based on, at times, reality, which caused her to fixate on someone. And we don't need to name the person, but she started to fixate on an individual. And because she had a computer, she was able to begin just trying to find out more and more about this person and began to stalk this person. Now, why do I bring that up? That's what led her into the criminal justice system, but it's a bigger picture than just the criminal justice system. She was led down that path of that desperate act because of her condition, because of her isolation. Had she had normal peer support, normal peer interaction, had she had an acceptance and treatment of her illnesses, then there's a very strong possibility that would have never been an option for her,
Because people who deal with attachment in an unhealthy way, sometimes they just like the person, or they become fixated on that person, via infatuation or limerence, just for the superficial reason of that person makes them feel a certain good way about themselves. Is that what was maybe happening
Exactly.
here?
I mean, one of the strongest elements of any relationship is a relationship in which both parties feel heard. How do they feel about themselves when they're not in the presence or in contact with the other one? Do they feel bad or feel good about themselves? She has no experience in any of that. She had no experience in, where do we learn all this stuff? Hit or miss, right or wrong. We learn it through mistakes in our relations. We learn it through successes in relations. We learn it through first heartbreaks, first dates, first social interactions. She had none of that. None of that. No experience.
Good relationships are built on a firm foundation of multiple bad relationships a lot of the time.
It can be.
Yeah, sometimes. I'm not saying that's always the case. Some people
right.
Some people luck out. Is that first person?
Some people do. Okay. Some people it's later in life based on experience and what they learned. But she had no experience, but she did have social media. And as we all know,
it's very good for your mental health, right?
Oh yeah, social media is awesome.
Yeah,
I
glad they
recommend it highly.
it.
It's the patron saint of maladaptive self-comparisons and really maladaptive methods of gaining one's self-concept.
And in all seriousness, we've spoken about this before. Comparison is what social media brought to the table. It brought this distorted window into other people's lives that make you feel like you're missing the boat on some facet of your own life. Look at how happy they are. Look at how fulfilled they are. Look at how complete their life is. Look at how rich, successful, popular these people are. And you point all that at yourself and you're like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I achieve this?
Well, I'll translate all that. You're correct. I'll translate it as we did when we talked about previously secrets. Comparison, bad.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just keep that equation simple.
Secrets and comparison, both really bad for your brain.
They're bad for you. They're not good for you. Comparing oneself to, especially a false narrative, is really treacherous. It's real tricky because these are things you cannot achieve. So if I cannot achieve, I can't try. I cannot achieve this thing I'm seeing that I am believing is how it's supposed to be.
Right.
If that's not for me ever and can never be for me, well, then where am I? And in her case, that was where she was. She was cornered, rather secluded in a space, both literally the home and emotionally because she had no experience with real peer interaction, real relationships. What do many young people want?
Acceptance.
Acceptance, love.
Belonging, sense of belonging.
Right. The sense of being wanted, the sense of being desired. And I'm not, before anyone gets upset, I'm not talking sexually. I'm talking about the desire to be near. People want you with them.
It's a more fundamental need than intimacy.
Yes. Think about those who've been fortunate enough not to have the barriers that Noor had. Think about the things you look back on now in your adolescent years that you didn't like and the things that you did like, the things that you hated and the things that you loved. At least you had those things to compare to each other, okay? The things you loved and the things you hated. They were both experiences that built you one way and sent you down a path. Where do you think who finds the path when there is no input like that and there is no experience? So you add to that Noor's general feedback within the home. Okay, something's wrong with you. Stop acting that way.
She have siblings?
My understanding, she had one, but I could be wrong on that because
Okay.
I was not able to verify that.
If she did, that would be another source for comparison then, correct?
Well, sure. In fact, it'd be I would say, dangerous source for comparison because sibling rivalry is a real thing in some families. Depending on what type of sibling you have someone who loves you and cares about you and is understanding, they could really build you up. And remember, we're looking through the eyes of possible psychosis here. What if that sibling was a rival that you can never be compared to, and the people who care for you, take care of you, that your livelihood depends on, favors that sibling? That's more exacerbation. But she also had that diagnosis of PTSD.
Right, and let's talk about that. PTSD is one of those things that is pretty misunderstood.
It is post-traumatic stress disorder. Some will say that's overdiagnosed. Others will say that that's only because it was underdiagnosed in the past, so it appears to be overdiagnosed. A lot of people don't understand that PTSD, the serious levels of PTSD especially, they change the way the brain functions. All of us have, you've heard of fight or flight, right?
Right.
Okay, so fight or flight is a
It's
physiological...
an animalistic instinct. It's built into all of us.
Right. It's a system that's made within us to keep us safe, right? We've kind of touched on it earlier in other episodes. So within that system in the brain, there's several parts of the brain that play a big role. Of course, your frontal lobe, which is your governing power of reasoning and logic and is the brake system for your impulses. If that's how your impulses are kept in check, because that frontal lobe puts the brakes on them. But there's also the amygdala. And the amygdala, and this is a super simple explanation, but it'll work. The amygdala is kind of standing guard, right? The amygdala is observing and ready. Sensations are past, and the amygdala may realize, in most of us, be working at a certain level that is what you would consider a normal baseline. In other words, the amygdala would become highly reactive if we were facing some type of danger. If there was a lion running at us head on, right, our amygdala would be kicked in at a very high level.
The amygdala is what makes you get startled by loud noises and stuff like that.
Yes. Now, what does the amygdala do? An oversimplified explanation here, but bear with me. The amygdala calls over to the hippocampus. And it's like, what is this? What's about to happen? And the hippocampus can say a couple of things. The hippocampus can say, hey, we've done this before, or that's not a lion. That looks like a lion, but it's not. Okay, it's a kid in a lion costume. And the hippocampus can say, don't worry about a thing. It's all good. We have this experience, and here they are. Here's all the experiences. Or the hippocampus can say, I don't know. So then what? Well, there's a couple other pieces that jump in. Then the cingulate and the insula, they kick in, and therefore a hormonal response takes place. Cortisol, the
stress hormone.
The stress hormone and adrenaline. Now, I hate this term, but I'll say it for descriptive purposes. You've heard people say, well, crazy people are strong, right? No, they're not. What is strong is a person in fight or flight who may be psychotic and paranoid and thinks they're about to be killed. They can be very strong,
right?
Because of the adrenaline. Now, In a so-called normal person, the frontal lobe kicks in as well and says, hey, relax, take a breath, it's going to be okay. In a so-called normal person, the hippocampus will help explain this away. The amygdala will slow back down. But with PTSD, the amygdala remains overstimulated, overreactive. The hippocampus remains understimulated, underreactive.
So you're always on high alert.
You're right on the threshold of it. Now, for a normal person, you meet this danger, right? And then the whole system reboots, and you flush the adrenaline and the cortisol, through your kidneys, and it's flushed out, and you come back to baseline. With PTSD, they never quite can flush. They never can quite come back to baseline. So those parts I named, those areas of the brain I named, they're at the threshold of what could be a fight or flight response, but they don't quite go into fight or flight, but they just have the feeling of being about to.
Always on that edge.
Always on that edge.
Trying to, when you walk into a room, you're immediately just looking for danger everywhere. And
yes, in these severe cases, that's what it's like for them. There are less severe cases, obviously. There's a continuum. But in the most graphic of severe cases, that's what that person's life would look like, being on that edge. Now, you add to that the triggers that create this, something that the brain has associated with their trauma, a smell, a texture, a feeling, a temperature, a sight, whatever it may be, a person, an actual person or persons, then that just exacerbates it, right? The trigger's there, the sensation's there, the association has been built, the frontal lobe lets them down, the hippocampus can't explain it away, the amygdala does its job, goes into full-blown fight or flight sometimes.
And I think probably something that at least some of those listening right now are adjacently aware of. Somebody gets out of an abusive relationship. They flinch a little bit easier than somebody else might, and that's a result of that. That could be a component of PTSD.
A bit more vigilant, maybe hypervigilant. It is a lot more to it than that, obviously. But I think that's a very good explanation, a very good diagram of the system and how it works. It's also good for people to understand it is physiological. They're not making this up. It's not their imagination that makes them feel hypervigilant, scared, or even fearful.
Right. There's a cause.
There's a cause. There's something happening there in the brain that's creating these feelings.
So is there a treatment for this?
Yes, absolutely. There are several treatments for it. Some require maybe a combination of therapy and medication. There's rapid eye movement desensitization treatment, which is a technique using a light system, and I won't go into the whole details of that, but it's well known. Cognitive behavioral therapy to understand your triggers and understand ways to cope with them before they reach that point where all those parts of the brain are kicking in, and be able to pull it back in and relieve that pressure and relieve that fear. Yeah, there's treatment.
So fair to say, she had a lot going on. And a lot that was not being actively addressed, other than the only way it was being addressed is it was making her feel a certain way about herself, feeling like she was letting her family down, letting herself down, not being able to operate optimally. She got infatuated, or she got obsessed with this individual, and we were talking about how this might have started her down her dark path.
That's my finding. I believe that sincerely, because remember now, during episodes of psychosis, it's typical that a person may believe everyone else is wrong. Everyone else is not telling me the truth, because my reality, based on what my brain, my senses, all the things that tell the rest of us what's real and not real, are telling them something different.
It's very hard for someone to understand that too. Somebody who doesn't have that condition. It's hard to see somebody who's struggling like that and not say to yourself, how do they not get what's actually real and what's not real? It's something that's very hard to be able to understand.
It is very hard to understand. And you and I were speaking earlier, pre-production, that the way I put it to people is, I'll ask them maybe to look at a wall that's white, and I'll say to them, what color is that wall? And they'll say, oh, it's white. And I'll say, well, you sure? And they'll say, well, yeah. I'll say, are you really sure? And they go, well, yeah. And I'll say, well, how do you know? And they'll say, well, because it's white. All right. So basically, they're saying that's what they learned at a certain age. Therefore, they trust that. Therefore, in that part of the brain that keeps track of what we've learned visually, I asked them a question about a visual thing. They came up with white instantly. And I'll say to them, what if that same neurological sequence of firing off and neurotransmitters moving about your brain gave you a different answer? The same mechanism now, not a different one, but the same mechanism gave you a different answer than everyone else in the room. Everyone said white when I asked that question except you, and you said something completely different. Would they all be wrong? Of course, that's a tough question.
Right.
Would they be wrong or would I be wrong? But wait a minute. What's telling them that it's white is telling me something different. So maybe I am right.
Because it's also a scary place to be. If you even have the ability to question whether you're the one who's wrong in that situation, it's not just that instance of you being wrong. It makes you question your whole reality. And that's a scary thing. And it makes a lot of people not want to go to that. That's kind of a facet of schizophrenia. It's like if you found out that something magical happened in the real world, right? It wouldn't just be that one thing that you found surprising, disturbing. It would make you be like, what else can happen that's like that?
Because that's counter to what I know to be reality. Imagine this, everyone. You wake up one day and everyone around you sees everything different than you do. But these are people that the day before pretty much saw everything like you did. Now, suddenly, they're not. Suddenly, they sound different. Suddenly, they see things differently. Suddenly, we can't agree on some basic things. And suddenly, also possibly, they seem to be looking at me differently. What if I woke up like that one day and I can't explain it, then I may have some paranoia. I may feel like people are conspiring against me.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just different than me. They seem to be conspiring, because how could everybody, even strangers, not agree with me?
And then somebody comes up to you and is like, no, look, this guy's red. Oh, he's in on it.
Right.
He's part of the conspiracy.
Exactly.
So what is it that makes somebody who might be experiencing an episode like that? And to be clear, this usually happens a little bit at a time with someone who has they kind of build up these things over time.
Well, generally with schizophrenia, a first onset episode is generally not a full-blown psychotic episode, but it usually begins with some subtleties in their daily life, such as becoming more recluse, not wanting to take part in social activities. Possibly it can look like depression, anhedonia, not feeling pleasure in anything. Then it can be more isolation as it goes up. That isolation could turn to distrust of others, because obviously they don't see or talk or understand what you're talking about, and they seem to be looking at you differently because they don't. It could go a little further, become kind of a loss of hygiene sometimes. Then the distrust grows, and then maybe hallucinations begin, which can be a part of one or more of your five senses, as I said earlier. Delusional thought then enters, delusions being beliefs versus hallucinations being a manifestation of one or more of your five senses. Then at that point, you're in a full-blown onset.
And let's not forget, this young lady, not one, not two, not three, she had at least 4 major clinical diagnoses. When it's all said and done, I understand that some of them didn't come about until after she was institutionalized, but
correct.
That sounds like hell.
Especially when no one in her mind appears to be believing you or listening to you. And along with the stigma that if you are presenting these behaviors, we'll call them behaviors right now instead of symptoms, because that's how they were seen by many in her family. These are behaviors. These are symptoms. If that's what she's experiencing, then what could her self-esteem be like? What could her self-concept be like?
I would
at
imagine
a crucial age.
Non-existent. I mean, it's getting beaten down every day. It's getting grinded into dust every single time something happens that makes her question her reality or feel like nobody cares. She doesn't have any friends because she's isolated. And as you've pointed out, isolation is obviously not good for this. Isolation helps mental illness the same way that you hear your car making a funny noise and you're just like, that'll go away eventually. It
sure
never does, and it always gets worse.
Everyone hopes it goes away.
Yeah, because that would be nice, right?
That'd be nice. I wouldn't have to admit to it. I wouldn't have to say I'm mentally ill. I wouldn't have to go to a quote-unquote mental health person, because that alone has got to be, just a stigmatizing event in your life. Your family doesn't have to make excuses for your behavior. Everything would be better if it just stopped, wouldn't it?
And it stopping in that circumstance and in that environment, that would be more of the medical oddity than the actual condition in and of itself.
Absolutely. That would be something for the books.
Yeah, you'd have to figure out what, you got to get some of their blood, figure out what.
How do they pull that off? And ironically, though, that's what families are hoping for. It just will stop. It'll go away. She'll grow out of it. She needs to straighten up. She needs to get herself together. Now, what are her choices then? Go with the flow of everybody's right and I'm wrong, and what can I do about it? How can I change? How can I stop what's going on with me? Or, like a lot of adolescents who are not mentally ill, take a stand and say, I'm going to do things my way. I'm going to, fight against this thing that's out here on me right now. And what did she do? She reached out through social media, tried to develop relationships, maladaptive, influenced by some people that are quite malicious out there. And I know it's hard to believe that there's malicious people out anonymously acting out here on the internet.
People on the internet acting in bad faith? Absurd.
It does happen. I have proof. But but
it's really a pressure cooker for somebody like this.
Yes. Again, isolation, bad. Again, engagement, good.
Real engagement,
Let's start there. Real engagement, open-eared engagement, people listening, not judging.
How did this obviously, there was a catalyst, and this obviously came to a head at some point where she crossed a line. What happened there?
In her mind, she had developed a relationship with an individual. That individual did not have a relationship with her.
And this is she like perceiving a relationship that isn't there?
Yes, social media and the way people speak. If you don't have experience in the way people speak, if someone says, "Hey, great to see you. I'm so happy that you reached out to me."
Yeah.
Well, you have a person with zero experience.
There's no context for that sort of interaction.
There's no context for it, and it grows, and that sounded like I love you to her. It sounded like, hey, you're the best. Hey, everybody's wrong. You're awesome. Yeah. And, there is just a basic human element here to be accepted. And so that basic element can be looked at as a threshold that can be high and only accepting of other people's compliments and admiration through a filter of common sense and safety, or it can be very low threshold of please give me this confirmation.
Right. If you've never seen a flower before, it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen.
That's right. That's right.
So she acted in a way that was incongruent with what she was being given by this person.
Yes, and she became obsessed, and she was able to stalk this person by the legal terms, and this person felt that they were being stalked and were being harassed. What happens when you are rejected, especially what if it's the first time you're rejected romantically? In your mind, romantically, to this other person's mind, they don't even know you. What do you think that rejection felt like?
Catastrophe.
Catastrophe. My life is over. And therefore, two directions once again. Gosh, they just don't want me. Or, hey, you tricked me. You lied to me. That wasn't nice of you to lead me on. That wasn't nice of you to be ugly to me. When, from the lens of a delusional concept, that person may have never said anything that should have led her to think any of those things.
Right.
But again, we're talking about her mind and her state of mind, untreated.
And everything that she knows to be true.
Everything she knows to be true, right? Remember, what do we know to be true? What color is that wall? Where did she go? She lashed out, and she crossed paths with the criminal justice system. She did not lash out physically. Remember, this young lady was, at the time of that offense, was around 18, maybe just turned 18. She had no car. She had no license. She couldn't drive. She lived in
So she wasn't
shut
like
in
rolling
her parents'
past his house every night or anything like that?
Knocking on anybody's doors or anything like that.
So
but
then,
she was making statements.
What did she do where she crossed the line in the eyes of the law?
Obviously, I'm not an attorney nor a judge, but I would say that in my experience, you cross the line when the other person can produce evidence of just harassment, of nonstop harassment at a level that goes beyond the pale of common sense. Maybe phone calls or making statements that are detrimental to that person's well-being or their happiness or their safety or their family's safety or happiness, consistently, publicly, interfering with their livelihood somehow, possibly by the constant need for attention, could be knocking on doors, could be a consistent threat level where everywhere this person turns, there is some interference with their life because of this constant attention from the perpetrator.
So
now,
all this was all digital?
Most of it was digital, but she did get out of the house a few times. And though she never touched anybody or anything, she did show up at a couple of stores, and she had an ability to locate this person. Listen, mental illness does not equate to, there's not a correlation of severe mental illness
and
to
a lack of agency.
Lack of intelligence. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
She was this very smart person. She put those tools to uses that got her in trouble. I'm not going to go into the details of her stalking,
sure.
But I'll just say that she was brought to an arrest. Her family's view of the arrest was, we're not bonding you out. She could have bonded out quite easily.
Wow. They didn't see...
Well,
and it's wild that they didn't understand how she could be, like, they know she's not really a social butterfly. They have to realize that. They're the reason for that, part.
But maybe this will teach her a lesson, right? She can stop these silly behaviors.
Oh, these silly, like, little side escapades and get back to doing what she's supposed to.
In all fairness, in time, they did bond her out, and this is where the secondary trouble began.
Let's examine that a little bit, because the system is kind of irrefutably a part of this whole story. We can't talk about Noor's tragic end without bringing into question some of the systemic ills that occurred here.
We cannot, because this is happening right now all over our country, and it has been for several decades.
And what you do, we haven't really talked about this a lot. What you do is very, very specialized. It's not really something that there's a ton of people out there doing psychological autopsies or bridging the gap between institutions and mental health. I mean, those resources exist, but there's not as many of them as there should be, right?
No, there's not as many as there should be. There's a lot of dedicated people out there who are working within these institutions to address the needs of the mentally ill. Things have gotten better in some municipalities and others that they have not gotten any better. I'm old enough to have witnessed the migration of the mentally ill from institutions into the jail with the hopes that the institutions would be cleaned up and the abuses that went on there would be corrected, and then maybe the jail would not be the hospital. But that didn't happen. Once the jails became the hospital, they stayed the hospital. Any given jail across the country will be the largest accumulation of severely mentally ill people in that county across the United States.
With officers, in some cases, especially if they're brand new, zero experience dealing with severe mental illness.
Probably not. I mean, you think about a person who goes into this line of work, law enforcement, civil, to serve the public, and suddenly they're a frontline mental health professional with a minimal training. So some forward-thinking municipalities have taken that and worked really hard to correct that. Others have not, but working towards correcting that from an institution setting, it's working completely depends upon the individual officer, right? One officer in that link that refuses to adhere to the training, adhere to the proper policies and appropriate procedures,
something can go horribly wrong.
Something can go horribly wrong.
Mm-hmm. And we didn't really see that with Susan, because it kind of feels like everybody did everything they should have, that kind of, except for the other inmate in that case. It's not like the system in that case really did anything wrong.
No, it's a very different case because she was not psychotic. She did not have psychotic features. She was not suffering from delusions. The bulk of her ailments were mood and as well as personality disorders, developmental personality disorders.
Well, we've talked about a lot about these disorders that Noor was struggling with, and it's easy to see how this could come to a precipice of her entanglement with law enforcement based on these stalking allegations. And I believe there was a terroristic threat allegation as well.
Yes. Let me back up a bit.
Sure.
When she first came in and arrested, she was assessed, and it was clear that she was mentally ill. Therefore, she met criteria to be placed in the court system through a caseworker into what was called a mental health court, which is a court that's going to take into consideration in its deliberations and its treatment of the so-called perpetrator their mental illness as a factor in what was going on with that person.
But we don't want listeners to think like, oh, what are you guys talking about? Look, there's a mental health court. We obviously have the systems in place because we're going to see why that's not really the case.
Well, you have the institutional mental health court, then you have individual players within it. In this case, she was put into a program whereby you complete the program, meaning what? You go to treatment, there's a caseworker that's following you. You're out here, you're bonded out, you're going to treatment, you're taking your medications, you're doing everything, you're staying out of trouble, and in time, you graduate from the program, and then you're, generally speaking, not for everyone, but your charges are dropped or expunged. Your sentencing becomes a suspended, and it's kind of like what's known as a first offender status. It's as though it never happened because you completed all this pre-sentencing criteria. In this case, it would be therapeutic criteria and so forth. Okay. Well, she was in that program, and she was bonded out. But she didn't receive a lot of support in adhering to the criteria of the program.
Because her parents probably didn't see the value in it, right?
Probably not. But also, she didn't drive. She couldn't go to the court-appointed treatment, court-ordered treatments and things like this. It's kind of like being on probation, but pre-sentenced. Well, and of course, responding to internal stimulus, responding to her, the elements of her delusional content, she crossed that path again and re-violated.
But the first time, just to go back just a little bit, at this point, the system were they seeing a criminal or were they seeing they were clearly seeing a medical crisis masquerading as a crime, at least the first time, right?
Yes. Well, what you see there is a person whose behavior, though technically criminal, technically breaking laws, we'll say, was a manifestation of their illness.
And it was.
Instead of overt criminality.
And this obviously doesn't matter as much because saying, oh, she didn't know any better, that doesn't really work in that environment. But she also didn't identify that her behavior was crossing a line. But then she did also have underlying mental health issues.
Well, that's the point. She couldn't make that distinction. So she's now being told, hey, you can't do that. And what was her rationale? Well, wait a minute. This person said they love me. This person said they were going to do this, that, and the other for me, and they didn't. That's not fair. Right? But that was her reality. That was witnessed and that was understood. Therefore, she was placed in mental health court. But the program within the mental health court was not working for her and for several reasons. She was being let down by not just the system, but by other cultural and familial concerns. But then this is when it got bad. The judge called her in and they warned her, you're going to end up getting yourself in a lot of trouble, young lady, and we're going to make sure you do. Now, you're going to do what we say, or do you just want to go to jail? And do you just want to, go to prison at some point? Because, they became very strict with her. Okay?
And that's terrifying for a young person. It's
probably very terrifying, but also the truth, because many of the people that are in mental health court, they're not psychotic, meaning they do have a grasp of time, person, place, situation.
They may just have behavioral issues.
And so they call them in, they give them a little coaching. Listen, you're messing up. Let's go. Get back in the program here. We're trying to help you, that kind of thing. Well, she misconstrued some of the verbiage and what was said, and wasn't long after that, she made a threat on social media to a judge, at a judge.
Okay, so she did this online.
Yes.
She named the judge, or she just like, oh, this judge.
She named the judge, and she made a threat.
Yeah, that's not good.
Not good. Bad. But, again, a manifestation of her illness as already witnessed and understood, or she wouldn't have even been in mental health court.
Because to her, this is like, you're trying to keep me from the love of my life sort of thing. Was it that, or was it the fact that she just didn't like any part of this whole legal process, and she had a lot of resentment because of that? Was it about them trying to separate the two of them, or just the whole thing?
The whole thing. I mean, think of it this way. Emotionally, she was about a 13-year-old. I mean, she had no real emotional content distinguishable from a 13 or 12-year-old, really, because she led such a closed life.
Right.
So what happens when a so-called out-of-control 12-year-old, 13-year-old gets in trouble and they go slam their door, their bedroom maybe, they may yell, "I hate you," "I wish I was dead," or "I wish y'all were dead." You know, you hear these teenagers and young people or even adults sometimes.
And they don't mean it because they don't know what they mean. Because
they don't have
not,
emotional regulation.
Yeah,
right?
and they don't understand the concept of permanence and all of that stuff.
Well, take that into her hands, social media, and some of the things she may have said at this judge, right? Just like other teenagers may scream at their parents in this manner. The judge will revoke her bond, revoked her participation in mental health court, and sentenced her, which was her right. This was explained to Noor, but again, this is unmedicated Noor.
Mm-hmm.
This is Noor not in treatment. The judge made a decision, and that judge gave her a sentence of 3 years in prison.
And bond is done now, right?
There is no bond. You're now sentenced.
Going to jail.
So she goes
for 3 years.
from the court to the jail and is in jail. Where she's been before. Now, she was placed in a special unit for persons that are mentally ill. 3 years was quite a stiff sentence for this, considering there was no way physically for her to follow up on these threats. She could have received some type of really stringent and highly supervised, ankle-monitored supervision instead of prison. A lot of things could have taken place. She was sentenced to prison for threatening a judge.
And, I mean, is this a common sense thing? Do you think another judge might have been like, this young woman doesn't have the agency to do any of this stuff? I mean, this doesn't really make sense here. This is a disproportionate punishment for what she's doing.
That's my point of view. There are others that will agree with me. I'm sure there are others that say, hey, you should cross the line. I get that too. But where are we? We're in a mental health court. We're not in just a municipality where this couldn't happen because there is no mental health court. Therefore, anybody who says these things is going to get the same type of treatment, right? She was already differentiated from other persons in the same population by being placed in this special type of court system.
But then you have other individuals who have like 5, 6, 7 times recidivism for violent crimes.
Yes.
And when you look at that, I think anybody would be like, this is nonsense.
It is nonsense. And people in the system will agree with this. I mean, I've known people that I've dealt with that are sentenced for statutory rape and they're out of prison in 5 years. Okay, this is a little girl who made some threats on social media, sentenced to 3 years.
This specific crime seems like the judge, this was more of like her, like you're not gonna say that stuff to me.
Yes, I'm going to teach a lesson. And also a judge that thought they understood mental illness through their own, narcissism, but they did not understand mental illness.
Right.
I promised that her clinical staff, which is part of a mental health court, would have disagreed with this sentence. Now, as part of a psych autopsy, I'm listening to phone calls home, and these phone calls had to be translated for me, obviously. They were in their native language. The father was very strict. You're going to prison. You did a bad thing. You must be punished. And this is part of your punishment. You'll be fine. Just stay out of trouble. Keep your mouth shut. Don't bother people. Control yourself. The mother was a bit softer, but she didn't contradict the father. From a hardcore corrections and jail standpoint, people who see people sentenced all the time to 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, life without parole, to hear someone getting 3 years doesn't ruffle a lot of feathers amongst untrained people, especially new people, because it's like, it's 3 years. She'll be out in maybe a couple of years.
But hearing what the offense was puts it in perspective, I would think.
Right. But not to everyone. And so that's where things went really wrong, because protocol was broken, because this particular institution has some very good protocols in situations like this. A specialized unit, specially trained officers who supervise said units, and so on. One thing that's never happens with a severely mentally ill person who's sentenced to prison is they're not isolated. They're given time to be around peers and process what's just happened. The mental health team would be there processing what happened and helping in any way they could. And as they await their transport to prison, which could take months, by the way, in some cases, in some municipalities, treatment is ongoing and there's a captive audience and so forth. Even group treatment, individual treatment, and so on. There's a peer group there that's real and live and shares some of the same type of problems, along with highly skilled professionals and trained officers. But a couple of days after coming back, an individual officer made some statements, some directions, and Noor reacted poorly. Noor made some statements and thought they were funny. And in looking at the video, it appeared to me that Noor was trying to kind of make some of the other detainees in the vicinity laugh. They were sitting at a table together, and that's, she was sharing and with these other folks, and the direction was given, and she smarted off, as one might think any detainee or any adolescent detainee might. And for whatever reason, against protocol, against procedure, in some respects, this officer took offense and was going to show everyone their boundary was going to be set.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It kind of almost seems like if the other people hadn't have been there, maybe it wouldn't have gone down this way. Like
Possibly not.
Because, corrections officer, I think it's pretty normal. You don't want everybody around there seeing you get manhandled by an inmate. It undermines your ability to control the environment. And
yes.
But it also is like you got to pick your battles, right? Like
you pick your battles, but also you got to understand, where are you? I'm in a mental health unit. I'm in a unit with people who may not have very good impulse control. I'm in a unit with people who may be responding to internal stimulus. I'm in a unit with people who may be psychotic. I'm also in a unit with someone who just came from sentencing, okay? So there's some things that are going on here. As an officer, that officer had the option to set that boundary, or this officer also had the option to call the mental health team and say, hey, Noor's acting out verbally. I know she just got sentenced. You guys may need to come back in and check on her, see what's going on. That was an option. The option was not used. The option that was used was everybody back to their cells, and Noor, not you. You go in this cell.
I'm going to prove a point.
Right. So she was isolated, and the mental health team was never notified that this person was isolated.
And that's really the big mistake here. That was a breach of protocol. Like on paper, that's an obvious and clear breach of protocol.
Yes, it is. That's also a common sense breach as well.
So,
you have a tip. Noor was a teenager, a very immature teenager who was severely mentally ill, who just got some very tough news, whose parents told her there's nothing we can do about it. You just need to buck up, who was in her typically maladaptive way, incongruently reacting. She would, like a lot of people with that level of mental illness, her affect was incongruent. When she was scared, she laughed. When she was upset, she kind of had a grin. It looked like a grin on her face, but it wasn't. So therefore, for a person who has authority over you and you're telling them something very serious and they're laughing or smiling, then that's seen as what? Some type of rebellious behavior, some type of disrespect, all of which goes into the decision-making of that officer in the moment. And so she decided, no, you're going to go to this room. She couldn't go back to her room with her cellmate, whom she liked a lot. And that was, one could say, all right, well, you can isolate someone, but then you needed to call the mental health team, and she did not.
And having that cellmate, I mean, getting that taken away after leading a life of social isolation, that was probably almost as good for her as the therapy.
Well, it was, because she was developing a peer, a real life, not one online, a real life person who typically had some of the same issues. And also, that cellmate was chosen for her because they knew it was somebody that would not take advantage of her, that might be a good influence on her. But a few hours later, as the sun went down, Noor took her own life. She hanged herself from the top bunk in between a permanent desk that's situated coming out of the wall and the bunk.
And you were then called?
Yes, I was called. First, obviously, the code went out for persons to come and try to save her life. You know, I mean, that's the protocol. Obviously, she was cut down, laid on the floor. Life-saving measures began immediately by I just can't say enough about the courageous efforts of these individuals. You can watch everything, and then I rewatched things on video. I watched the videos closely. We were talking about people who are working so hard that they exhaust themselves, and then, lack of a better phrase, they tag out. The next person takes their place, and continuing these measures.
People don't realize how athletically intensive some of these life-saving efforts can be. You know, if you've never seen it in person, and I haven't either, you've just described it to me. I was shocked to hear how many, just the absolute, just relentlessness of these efforts until the absolute point where everybody's just like, all right.
They exhaust themselves, and it's an awkward position. They're on their knees, they're on the floor. I mean, Noor was about 4'11", maybe 5 feet tall, but she was morbidly obese. And they went right to work. And then by then the medical team is in. They're coming in. They go right to work. And then later the EMTs show up and they go right to work until all avenues of life-saving are exhausted, and the decision is made that she's gone.
And this window of time where an individual is put into isolation before being transported to prison, especially in these mental health units, this is a big deal.
It's a very big deal.
And this isn't the first time this has happened in this window, right?
No, I mean, statistics will tell you across the United States that, you know, when a person receives a sentence, there's even protocols set up where court officers who observe the reaction of the sentence in the individual. I'm not even talking about mentally ill people who observe the reaction will call back over to let the jail know, hey, Joseph Smith really broke down in court today. Joseph Smith has received a 20-year sentence and he is taking it bad. And then a mental health person will be at admissions when they come back in from court and start processing with Joseph Smith, you know, keeping them safe, assessing for suicidal ideation, suicidal potential, and so on. Professionally, you know, it's a very difficult task. It's obviously what happens when people get a life sentence or death sentence or something like that.
It's absolutely vital that people be taken care of in those situations.
Yeah, absolutely vital. It's a statistically a very high time for suicidal attempts, a very high time for high levels of suicidal ideation, even without an attempt. It's something that has to be paid attention to. It typically is in forward-thinking municipalities. This particular one did have great protocols for this. In this case, she was received by mental health on the way back from sentencing. She was processed. It's what happened later that the clinicians knew nothing about, that she ended up taking her life. And this has affected a lot of people. Now, even though, Davis, this was years ago that this happened. This was years ago. But I've been doing this a long time, and a lot of people have been working in these environments a long time. And when I first started out, I think you and I have talked about this, when I first started out decades ago, things bothered me a lot. You know, I'd bring them home. I just really would chew on it and get very upset. Things really affected me tremendously.
I can't even imagine that. It's impossible for me to put myself in that place. Like you and people in your profession see horrendous things that most human beings will never see in their entire lives on a daily basis.
I hope they don't. And it is difficult. And I'm not just in regard to what we're talking about, psychological autopsies, but also some of the things just in the therapeutic side, trying to provide therapeutic care for people, but also the forensic criminal work I've done. But in time, something probably equally bad happened to me, and that is nothing bothered me. I was like a machine. I mean, I'll come in, I don't care what I'm looking at. It's like I'm walking through a grocery store, just objectifying everything and doing my job. But now, when this one happened and a couple others happened, and then there was another crime scene that happened that really, from a hostage situation that affected me, I start to notice things are starting to bother me again. So I've gone full circle.
Which is, maybe you could call it a good problem.
Well, I think it is at least I know I'm human.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, it was knowing that things are bothering me again after all these years, I've gone full circle, is what brought me to the realization that I needed to partner with you and present these podcasts because the content of these podcasts have been in my head for decades. But this realization that I've gone full circle was a signal to me that these stories need to be told, and that thankfully I met you, and we've come together, and it was the feeling of resurfaced memories. Instead of letting it tear me down, we did this. So had I been that state of just being a machine, we would not be doing this right now, I promise you.
It's a fulfilling endeavor, definitely. And I will say that, like, just for the sake of transparency, and I don't think I brought this up before, I haven't really ever been touched directly by suicide, but I was shocked at what I learned about it and how nefarious it is in society. The fact that it's like it's like water slowly rising under the floorboards. We're totally oblivious, and there's still this massive stigma around it, around suicide. We buy into this myth that it's always going to be obvious, or that people will just ask for help if they're drowning, but they hide it. They put on a face, and we look right past them because we're just busy with our own routines. We're not bad people. We're not heartless people. We're busy. We don't always know how to engage, and we always assume that this is the kind of extreme pain it's rare, or that it only happens to strangers far away. But it's right here. It's in our jobs. It's in our neighborhoods. It's in our friend groups. But it's here. It's now. The beast walks among us. And yeah.
I think you've said it once that none of us are more than 2 separations from suicide.
Right. Yeah. And this is a horrible thing to have to say. It's almost unbelievable that I don't really know anybody. And again, I probably do have 2 degrees of separation.
You do. You know a family that probably has an experience with it that has not mentioned it or talked about it.
Right.
And
why is that?
Because of stigma.
Stigma.
It's one of the only ways of dying that creates shame, creates guilt, creates a lot of misunderstanding, feelings of abandonment. Most people don't know the statistics. There's generally more than twice as many suicides as homicides.
Right.
More people die by suicide than die by automobile accidents. Why doesn't everyone know this?
Yeah, most people don't know the statistics, and most people don't consider that suicide is one of, if not the most, preventable causes of death.
It is preventable. And to think that it's not is a myth.
And this is something that I also want to address. It's difficult for some people to reconcile the fact that there may have been missed opportunities or warning signs with the fact that they lost someone. And, I've mentioned this online before on our social medias, and I think it's important to address now, and I'd like to do it with you here. If you've lost someone to suicide, what we're not saying is that you didn't do everything you could have to prevent that from happening.
Absolutely not saying that.
And it is a hard concept to wrestle with, that there are missed opportunities and there are warning signs out there. But if you've lost someone to suicide, you did everything you could. You acted with love, you acted with respect, and you acted with dignity. And that's not diminished at all by the fact that there are certain things that we as a society could do better in service of prevention.
You're absolutely correct. Awareness, number one, the awareness that it is a possibility in our culture, in all of us, that someone could react to the stimulus, the negative stimulus in their life in such a way that they could think that suicide would be a viable answer to that. And for most people, and you've done as many psych autopsies as I have, or generally receive the news of a suicide of someone they love or care about as disbelief, and that could not have happened. What we're saying here is not about someone being at fault. What we're saying here is it does happen. It can happen, and we have to be aware of that. We cannot say that, well, they're a safe driver and they don't smoke and they don't do drugs, so they're safe in the world.
They smile all the time.
They smile all the time. They have a good job, or they're good looking, or you would be surprised of the rationale that people have when they believe that suicide can never be a part of someone they care about's life.
Yeah, we try really hard to find some kind of logic to protect ourselves from the reality of it. And I think we do the exact same thing on a much broader scale. Like looking through the comments on our posts online, I keep seeing this one idea pop up over and over again. People saying that suicide is just the natural endpoint of depression. Like it's this inevitable organic terminus of the illness. And I don't know. It feels like there's a massive blind spot in trying to normalize it like that.
Killing oneself is a catalyst for a litany of issues that will continue in all those that are left behind. To think that it's the organic terminus of depression I'm going to really confront that. Here's why.
Please do, because it's definitely not true.
Listen to the word organic, meaning it's natural path, right? Our natural path is not suicide. Our physiological makeup dictates that we don't even have to consciously try to keep ourselves safe in certain situations. We have a natural system of survival that attempts to keep us safe. We have to defeat that to die by suicide. We have to defeat our own physiological, neurological makeup, wiring, if you will, to simplify it. We have to defeat that to die by suicide because organically, we're going to try to be safe organically, right? We have a protective system within us. I may have mentioned this before. I was a lifeguard when I was younger. One thing they teach you, you do not swim out to people who are drowning. That's your last resort. Why? Because they will drown you trying to stay alive.
But you do need to throw them a lifeline.
You throw them a lifeline. There's an old saying, reach, throw, row, go the equipment, and go. Go being your last resort. You reach for them. You throw them a rope. You row out or some type of vessel if it's far enough out. You go with equipment like a floaty or something, or you just go on your own. But going on your own is the last resort because we're so hardwired to stay alive that we could naturally, mistakenly take someone else's life while trying to stay alive. So I can't say that depression, the illness, not the feeling, has a organic ending, which is suicide as a possibility. I have to disagree with that. Depression is an illness. The type of illness it is, it's misunderstood, but it's treatable.
Right.
There is a treatable way to address depression. And guess what? The treatment for it is organic because it helps people, resolve cognitive distortions, resolve negative cognitions, reframe negative cognitions, all right? Resolve physiological issues, vitamin deficiencies, and maybe hormonal deficiencies and many other things that play into depression. Those are all organic endings or treatments for depression. Taking one's life, I have to disagree with that statement. And people may get upset with me. And listen, I respect all of your opinions on this. I'm just giving my opinion as someone who has dealt with this for decades and has witnessed the results of suicides, witnessed the results of attempted suicides on people, their families, and everyone else. Also, I can't agree for this reason. It is a myth, a well-known myth, that everyone that attempts suicide actually wants to die. Okay?
And again, we've talked about this in our episode about William, our last episode. That's been proven time and again.
Yes, it has. I can tell everyone, watch the documentary The Bridge. In that documentary, there's a man, a young man that they interview who jumped from the Golden Gate Bridge and survived. I won't tell his story. You can watch it. He's still alive, and he still tells his story. And like many people who have attempted and almost died, they realize moments into their attempt, I want to be alive. So if they had died, could we consider that an organic, natural terminus for depression? Probably not, or their brain wouldn't have clicked on and said, wait, save me.
Yeah, and the ironic thing is that if we're so hardwired to live, then it makes no sense why we're so afraid to talk about something so preventable that is destroying human life. We'll talk about trauma and our anxiety. We'll talk about it publicly. We'll talk about it all day long, but we freeze on suicide. Because of that avoidance, we don't learn what a real crisis actually looks like. You know, maybe we mistake severe mental illness for a behavioral problem, and we punish it instead of treating it, which is exactly what happened with Noor. So, Dana, looking back at her case, what can we actually learn from what happened to her?
That's a good question. You know, at the end of a psych autopsy, you know, you sum it up and you offer your findings, okay? In Nora's case, this was a determined act, but it was influenced by her mental illness. Her mental illness was exacerbated by the actions of a court system, a familial system, a cultural system, and the mistake of an individual in an authoritative position over her. Everyone underestimated her fear. Everyone misjudged her ability to cope. Everyone assumed that this is something that will pass, that she will learn a lesson from this sentence. That's from the standpoint of the criminal justice system. From the standpoint of the family, that was understood that this was something that was in Noor's control and that she could just learn to stop acting the way she acts and straighten up in her life and move forward. So she was let down. She was misunderstood. Her presentation was one that didn't lend itself for people to listen. But what's really tragic in this case was the people who were trained to listen didn't listen. I don't blame the family. They acted upon their own instincts, their own knowledge level, their own baseline of understanding of these very odd and different presentations. But there was a whole litany of people who were trained and supposedly understood them that underestimated the impact that each of them were having on this individual, the impact of a judge, the impact of the sentencing, the impact of an officer's decision, okay? And the result was the death of a young lady who could have been helped.
And, you know, if we cultivate and nurture a better understanding of mental health topics and issues, and suicide as a topic in and of itself is something that is very prevalent in our society, this societal understanding will snowball and it'll translate into societal pressure for these systems to put more things in place, like postvention efforts and loss teams, crisis diversion units, co-responders, peer-run respite centers, you know, a broader availability of these mental health resources. And basically the spirit of what I'm saying is that societal efforts will ultimately translate into systemic efforts to get better at handling these sorts of things.
Well, they will, because what happens in a jail or a prison is a direct reflection of the public sector in that vicinity. All right. So if there's a rise in let's say, jail suicides, one needs to look at where is that jail located and look at the number of suicides happening in the public sector where that jail is located. You see, what happens with people is suicides aren't reported like homicides. The public doesn't know about the suicides that are happening unless it's something broadcast. Somebody's on an overpass, or it's a celebrity, or it's a well-known person, or an athlete, or something, right? So we don't know. The general public doesn't know all the suicides that are going on. So then they hear there were 3 suicides in our jail in the last year. That's incredible. What they don't know is there were probably 6 suicides every day in their town,
in their community.
And I've seen this firsthand. I was called in once in Volusia County, Florida, to take a look at a rash of suicides that were taking place in their jail. And I looked up the number of suicides that were happening in their county, and they were among the highest in the entire state of Florida. And the public officials there didn't know that. I said, well, call your coroner.
So they just weren't tracking this metric at all?
No, not at all. I said, well, call the coroner and see.
And this is just one municipality. Thousands in the entire country.
And the coroner told the jail commander, sir, every Monday when I come to work, I have 10 to 20 individuals waiting that I have to consider and examine and due to suicide.
That's unbelievable. Now, when you lay out those numbers, 10 to 20 people a day, it kind of forces you to confront the actual scale of what we're talking about. And that's just one coroner. There are roughly 2,400 of these jurisdictions across the country. Now, obviously, I'm not saying every single one of those coroners is dealing with 10 to 20 cases a day, but even if only a fraction of them are, the national scale of this crisis is staggering. So before we go any further, if you're listening to this and you're struggling, or if you're carrying a weight that feels too heavy to handle on your own, please don't keep it to yourself. You can call or text 988 at any time to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It's free, completely confidential, and open 24/7, so please make that call. So we began this episode telling Noor's story. She was 19, dealing with PTSD and schizoaffective disorder, and carrying a heavy weight of depression. She never actually made it to state prison because she took her own life in a solitary cell. Putting someone in acute psychiatric distress and complete isolation is a direct violation of protocol, and yet the system did it to her anyway. Now, our goal with this podcast is simply to talk about these heavy, highly stigmatized topics openly and honestly, without the sensationalism. And doing this alongside you, Dana, bringing your 25 years on the front lines of forensic psychology to the table, is how we try to translate these tragedies into actual systemic prevention. I also want to thank everyone who's been listening and supporting the show, especially over on TikTok. I've been very surprised by the engagement we've been getting there, and we've been reading the comments and seeing the way you're all interacting with each other, offering support, sharing your own experiences, and talking to one another with real empathy means the world to us. You are building the exact kind of community we hope to create here. So thanks for being here, for caring, and for pulling back these layers with us. Dana, is there anything else I'm forgetting or that we need to talk about before we wrap up for today?
I just want to thank you, Davis, for sharing that with us, and I am honored that anyone would take the time to share their experience and comment on this effort we're making. It is important, but everyone, please remember, you're a part of this too. And as Davis said, we all have the power to intercede, intervene, and just be there for somebody.
Absolutely. Now, if you want to help us keep the conversation going between episodes, you can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Anatomy of an End, or listen directly on YouTube at Anatomy of an End Pod. If you believe in the work Dana and I are doing here, the best way to support us is to hit follow or subscribe on whatever app you're listening on right now, and leave us a quick rating or review. It takes 5 seconds, but it genuinely helps other people find the show. That's it for today. Stay present, stay engaged, stay alive. Take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.